Christian School Confidential, being a watchdog for survivors and victims of the fundamentalist Christian school experience. Hi, my name is Dwayne Walker, the author of Christian School Confidential, and I want to address the question, is the IFB a cult? If you go onto Facebook, you will see many Facebook groups with the titles IFB Cult, and if you've been watching some of the broadcasts by Anderson Cooper and articles by ABC News in 2020, you'll often hear people refer to the IFB cult. So let's bring it down to brass tacks here. IFB stands for Independent Fundamental Baptist. And that's basically anybody who's not in the Southern Baptist Convention or the General Association of Regular Baptists and maybe some other organizations that I'm not thinking of now. You know, they're the non-joiners, as it were. And the phrase IFB is an interesting phrase because for years, decades, really, I've seen the phrase IFB in the Sword of the Lord newspaper, but never once during all that time did I ever actually verse that phrase as IFB. You never hear me say, oh, I go to an IFB church, because I think some people would ask me, well, what exactly do you mean by that? And the reason is, if you're talking about the Roman Catholic Church, and you're talking about a bona fide organization, you know they're based in Vatican City. You know that Vatican City is the capital of the Catholics. That Salt Lake City is the capital for the Mormon Church, or the Church of Latter-day Saints, as they would prefer to be called. But to call something the IFB indicates that it's an organization and that it has a capital and you can go visit it. You know, where is IFB headquarters? Greenville, South Carolina, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Springfield, Illinois, Lynchburg, Virginia. You're not going to find it. So the origin of the phrase IFB comes from Facebook, really, because when some of the articles that appeared first in ABC News and then later in other publications, the term IFB was being used by victims and survivors of IFB abuse to just have an easier term to phrase it instead of having to go through this big long list of definitions like I just did, which was pretty much the rule for many years. I would tell people, well, I came from a Baptist church, not Southern Baptist, independent, and then I'd have to do this little dance to explain exactly who the independent fundamental Baptists were, but now it's just brought together in one nice little word. Now, is it a cult? That's another harsher question. And the thing that you have to keep in mind when using the word cult is when I say, or if I were to say this group is a cult, that's implying that the other groups out there are mainstream and are basically rational and are probably dealing with a point of controversy in a way it should be handled, unlike these little irrational cults. And that's always been a problem that I've had with cults, even going as far back as 1987.
Well, Dwayne, you talked earlier on the way over tonight about how fundamentalists define cults. Maybe you'd like to...
Yeah, it's the funniest thing in the world to hear fundamentalists along the lines of Bob Jones or Jerry Falwell define cults. It's always defined as somebody who does not accept Christ as their Savior.
Right.
They're a cult.
Walter Martin wrote The Kingdom of the Cults, an encyclopedic breakdown of all sorts of groups that evangelical Christians consider cults. And if you read that book, you would come to the conclusion that a cult is defined by their beliefs. If their beliefs are out of the mainstream, that makes them a cult. However, during that same time, there was another group of cult researchers coming from what was then called the Cult Awareness Network, and their view of what a cult was didn't stem from the beliefs at all. It stemmed from action.
There's a lot of controversy about what constitutes a cult. What do you define a cult as being?
A destructive group or a cult, and we only are concerned about destructive cults. There are many cults that are benign, but a destructive cult has three characteristics. They recruit deceptively. They don't tell you anything about who they are or your commitment that you have to make. They have a systematic program of thought reform, mind control, ideological remolding, whatever you want to call it. It's a program designed to change the way you think and look at the world and see yourself in it. And the final characteristic is that the group engages in illegal and or unethical activities.
And I can think of many groups, not just religious, that would fit that description.
Right, and we actually, in my head, groups, destructive groups, are categorized in 4 ways. There are the religious groups, and I think they're most numerous because if you're a religion here in the United States, you're tax exempt. But there are also political cults, there are therapy cults, and there are even commercial groups, groups that have really no underpinning except making money.
Well, here's the thing. If we go by the definition of cults as action, those who are deceptive in their marketing, who use intimidating tactics to keep people within the fold, who threaten and coerce, well, you're going to find a lot of so-called mainstream religions may fit that category as well. But if you keep the emphasis on beliefs, then the mainstream religions get a free ride because nobody's judging them by their beliefs. And if their actions are similar to cults, then people just shrug their shoulders and say, that's the way all organizations are. So it's for that reason that I've usually shied away from calling an organization a cult. And it's not because I'm trying to protect them, it's because I don't want to protect the guilty. And I'm talking about the good people, the nice people. Let me give you an example. If you were around back during the time that David Koresh and the Branch Davidians were in power in Waco, Texas, but before the raid, before the raid that killed everybody, and told people I was held captive by this cult, and they made me have sex with the leader, and they made me do all these terrible things, you would have so many Christian groups ready to embrace you. Oh, that's so sad that that happened in that cult. That terrible, terrible cult. But what happens if you're coming from a Southern Baptist church, or if you're coming from, say, Bob Jones University? Chris Peterman just recently read a statement from somebody who preferred to be kept anonymous, who was molested by a dorm soup at Bob Jones University.
The preacher boy drove to a remote park and put the car in park. I started to talk, but I only got about 3 words out before I started crying. Without warning, my preacher friend grabbed my breast. Preacher boy's father had hired a private investigator to follow me around for 4 weeks to catch me doing these sad, sad things. He said he didn't want to open it, but he would if my father used the word molest again. Preacher boy would not admit to any wrongdoing, but I would not back down. We were told, for the good of Christ, that we needed to sign a paper saying we would never talk about these matters again. There was no apology. I actually signed papers saying I would never tell the truth again. It sounds unbelievable, but this is Bob Jones University we're talking about.
A little problem with that, though. A little problem, because in the making of a contract, you can't have a contract and have it legal in this country, I believe, if you're using it to cover up something that's also illegal. Now, when I was at the Survivors of Institutional Abuse Convention, I did corner Mark Levine, who is a lawyer, because he made a statement that I thought was very interesting. It was a statement regarding whether or not you can sign your rights away to be abused. Parents, if they put their kid in an IFB home or a non-IFB home, and they find out that abuse is happening there, they can't talk, supposedly, because they signed this paper. But Mark Levine had something different to say.
There are a lot of people that think that because they've signed a contract that they can't take action to protect their children. That's a load of BS. As a lawyer, I can tell you, you cannot sign away your rights to sue someone for killing your child, for abusing your child. You just can't sign those rights away. People have inherent rights not to be abused. And no one can say it's okay to abuse me. It is never okay to abuse. It is never okay to murder. It is never okay to torture. And if you have any questions about legal action, consult a local attorney, call the police, call 911, call your district attorney, but don't think because you signed some contract that you can't stop people from abusing your children.
So if you can't sign your rights away on something like that, do you really think you can sign your rights away when it comes to protecting the identity of a campus rapist or a campus molester or something whereby someone who commits abuse is being kept in the presence of children and vulnerable people? No, you can't. So that's another instance of deception by religions that are supposedly not cults. Now, I can go around and say, okay, only those who have abused children and covered it up, they're the cults, but the rest of the people are good. But that's not the case, because every single denomination now, with rare exceptions, has been hit up by a child abuse complaint. So you're not going to hear the word cult coming from my lips on that, because to be quite honest, I think all y'all are guilty. This web series is brought to you by Christian School Confidential, a manifesto disguised as a harmless novel. Now available from Amazon.com and ChristianSchoolConfidential.com.